Hi Gordon. This morning we're going to do a brake job, a front end brake job, and we'll look at the back brakes too. If we need to replace the pads back there, we'll do that. But we're going to replace the front pads and rotors on a 300D Mercedes. We bought these materials as a kit. What we get is some new rotors. The rotors on a Mercedes you can't turn. It's a fairly soft steel, and it's very intentionally built that way, so the brakes get a real good bite. So when you wear out a pair of Mercedes rotors, you don't go and have a machinist turn. Rather, you just buy a new set, and they're not that expensive. This particular kind of brake pad is called a Techstar, and I really like it because it has a soft material on the back where the caliper hits that, and it doesn't make any noise as a result. It's my favorite kind of brake pad. So we got a set of front brake pads. We got some little sensors that tell the electrical part that operates the light inside the car that says your brake pads are wearing down. We got new rotors. They happen to give us some bolts to mount the calipers back to the steering knuckle, and you can see that they've got Loctite already on them. That's not really necessary because we can just put Loctites on the bolts that exist, so either way, they just happen to come in a kit. Let's look at some tools. I use a coat hanger. We need a piece of wire to hang the caliper so that we don't stretch the brake hose or damage it in any way. So we're just going to cut that and use that as a piece of wire to hang it. I've got some pliers here. It'll become obvious what they're used for, but a small pair of needle nose is pretty important in this particular job. You'll see why. We need a small punch to drive some little pins out. You could use a nail. About a 16-penny nail would work if you didn't have a little tiny punch, but you need a pretty small shaft on the punch. I need a chisel to knock the hub off that's a cap that's on the hub. I need to drive it off of there, and a hammer to do so. I've got a set of 1/2-inch drive sockets along with a ratchet and an extension, a couple of extensions. I've also got a torque wrench. We need to torque those bolts down to the right torque. And then a screwdriver is always handy, and also I've got a set of hex sockets. I know that the big one that attaches these discs is a 10mm. And there's another little one, I don't know if it's a 4 or 5, it's one of the two, 4 or 5mm, that holds the nut that tightens down the bearing on the hub. We gotta release that. We've got some Loctite. I prefer the medium strength for this job. It's plenty good. That high strength stuff is real hard to get off, and assuming you're going to keep the car long enough to do more than one brake job, I would recommend this medium strength Loctite. And then I've got a 3/8-inch drive to use with this set of hex nuts. And I got a big pair of pliers. That's what I always use to back the calipers off. In other words, to push the calipers back to get the brake pads in there, to push the pistons back. I always use just a big set of pliers. You could use a C-clamp, works fine. And then we're going to pack the wheel bearings while we're at it. We need a couple of grease seals in order to do that, because we usually destroy those grease seals, one on each side when we undo them. And I've got just a little $5 bearing packer. You can pack them by hand, but these things don't cost very much. You can get them at just an auto supply store. You put the bearings in there. We'll show you how. And then I've got a grease gun. You've got to make sure that you're using a good grease for disc brakes. You can see that says disc brake wheel bearing grease. You don't want to use just standard grease that goes in things like ball joints and so forth. You got to be careful that you use some, because it melts at a real high temperature, and so you don't want that grease in that wheel bearing to run down on the brake pad. So you need some wheel bearing grease to pack these bearings. So let's go get at that job. I'm going to use an impact wrench. It's not necessary. The lug wrench works fine. Okay, the first thing we need to do is disassemble the pads and take the pads out. So before we take the pads out, we want to take these little sensors out of there. And I use a pair of needle nose typically. Sometimes it takes a bigger set. And frequently they break. And actually I should take the pins out first. I'm sorry. I need to remove these pins, oops, the little cotter pins that hold the pads in, and you'll see, there's my little punch. There it is. Well, I needed that little punch. I need to drive these pins out. I usually just set them there. Now that one, someone has put a piece of wire in that thing. They lost the little cotter pin. To get that piece of wire out. Okay. So we drive the pins out. Once we drive the pins out, there are little springs that we need to take out that hold the pads in there, one on top, one on bottom. And then these things will come out typically. Frequently you tear them up getting them out. And then take the same pair of needle nose and they'll pull right out of the mechanism there. So we're just going to throw those away. We've got some new ones. And typically we just pull the pads out. These aren't very worn, but we're doing this brake job anyway. So once we pull these pads off, then what we're going to do is pull this caliper out, hang it up here on the torsion bar. So we need a wire. We use a coat hanger. Usually I'm going to hang it up there. Now, there are just two bolts that disassemble this caliper or take it off the steering knuckle. And I believe that's a 19mm socket. In fact, I'm sure it is. So if I could read 19mm. Oops, I got an 18. Now, these two bolts will be very obvious. They're not the two here. These are the wrong ones. They hold the caliper together. But there are two more bolts a little further in. And if you just reach back there, you'll find them very easily. And sometimes they can be on there pretty tight. About 90 pounds of torque or something to that effect. Usually these bolts come out hard. In other words, someone should have put Loctite on there, and so they're kind of stiff all the way out. These are not very stiff, to tell you the truth, but there has been some Loctite on there, so too, associated with a brake caliper. Now it comes right off, and what we want to do is just hang it up so we don't put any pressure on the brake hose. So just hang it up out of our way. We'll mount it back later when we get this disc off of there. Now we just hung the brake caliper up on the torsion bar, and you can see the hoses are free. The hose, and then there's an electrical connection. And now the next thing we want to do is we want to change the rotor, and we're going to put a new rotor on there. And in order to do that, we've got to take a nut off that's underneath this hub. Now to start these things off of there, what I usually do is just take a hammer and chisel. And you can see that it starts to separate right there. This is just a dust cover for that nut. Comes off of there. Usually there's a little electrostatic thing that's mounted in there. There's a little spring affair. This one doesn't have it. It should. It's a radio interference thing. Keeps the static down. But what we want to do is undo this nut. Now that's the place where we need that hex set, because to lock this nut tight, there's a little, I believe it's a 4 or 5 millimeter. Let's try 5. Yeah, it's a 5. So you have a 5 millimeter, and I've got a 3/8 drive. So very first thing we have to do is that's the thing that keeps that nut in position. So we need to undo it. We need to loosen it up. We don't take it all the way off, but once we loosen it, you'll see that that nut is typically almost like finger tight. This one is a little tighter than finger tight, but it won't be very tight. I usually just use this big pair of pliers that I got out, and you see how easy that turned? And when we go back with it, we'll show you how to get it at the right torque. But what we want to do is take this nut off of there. And it's the nut on the spindle, and there's a bearing underneath it. So we take it off, and I usually just drop it into the dust cover. And then that bearing is going to drop right out of there. And you see we're going to pack that bearing. I'll set it aside for a moment. Now that hub will come right off. And there's another bearing on the inside of that hub. And we're going to pack both the bearings. I'll take it over on the workbench. We'll pack both the bearings. And then we're going to take the disc off of the hub. And those are the 10 millimeters that we've got to undo. Now, in a shop, they typically do that with an impact wrench. And you may not have an impact wrench, but there's a way to do that. See, the problem is if you try to unscrew those, there's no way to hold it, and you don't want to put it in a vise. So what I typically do, if I don't have an impact wrench, is just mount this to the tire and stand on the tire while I'm backing that off. We'll show you how to do that. As a matter of fact, let's just do that before we take it in and take the bearing out. So what we need is those lug nuts back. The lug nuts, we just really need a couple of them. And the tire that this thing mounted on. So let's just get the tire. So if we put this back and take a couple of lug nuts, then effectively we'll have a way now we've got something we can stand on and undo those bolts. So what we need is an extension, a 1/2 inch drive, and a 10 millimeter. Oh, and I'm sorry, we need to reduce the 1/2 inch drive to a 3/8. We need a reducer because my 10 millimeters in a 3/8 drive. So now, get my ratchet going the right way. Now we can undo those. Sometimes I use a cheater pipe if I don't have a long enough. And those are usually on there with Loctite. They should be. But you can see that I'm mounting the tire, and I didn't even have to cinch those lug bolts down. I have something that I can secure that thing with so I can back those off. Okay, so we're just going to take all 5 of those out, and we'll have, that was tight. We'll have, okay, I got these 10 millimeter hex, these 5 undone, and now I've taken the lug nuts off, but the thing is still stuck, and that's just because, you know, it was on there really tight. It separates right there, and sometimes when it's stuck, if you'll just take a chisel and tap it right in there, you can separate the hub from the rotor, and the rotor is the thing that we want to replace. Now, these rotors, they will last probably through several pads. I've heard of them lasting 75,000 miles. Depends on whether you're doing a lot of in-town driving or what. But what happens is you get a little ridge right here on the outside. Ridge on the outside right here, and the spec on it is I think it's 10.6 millimeters is the wear limit on the bottom side. Essentially, if you get very much of a ridge on that thing at all, you need to be replacing these rotors, but you can't turn them. They're too soft, and if you turn the rotors and you get them too thin because you turn them down in a lathe, you run the risk of the pistons popping out of the calipers. I mean, finally the pistons move further and further because the rotor is too thin, and if they ever pop out of those calipers, you're in bad trouble. You're going to die, or maybe you are. You're not going to have any brakes at all. So don't mess with this. Don't turn these rotors. Buy new sets when you need them. They'll last probably 3 or 4 pad sets. You need to have them mic'd in 10.6 millimeters is the lower wear limit, and we can show you how to do that with just a pair of $6 little calipers that you can get from Ace Hardware. So let's take the hub in and repack the bearings and replace the rotor. Now I want to take that grease seal out, and sometimes you have to get a little leverage on that thing with a screwdriver. And if you don't have a vise, and mine's not handy right now, what I'm going to do is mount this thing backwards in the old rotor so that normally the grease seal that I want to get to happens to be like this. Okay, so it's on the inside, and that creates too deep of a crevice to get a screwdriver in. So an easy way to do that is just to mount the hub temporarily backwards back on the old brake disc, and now I'm going to have something to get some leverage on, and I don't even have to mount it tight. I just have to secure it same way that I was doing with that tire, so that I, you know, have a reference point, if you will, something to secure it without putting it in a vise. So I don't have to have it tight or anything. I just need to get something I can grab onto. So what I need to do is get that grease seal out of there. And as I say, frequently you just destroy them in the process. There it's coming. There. Now the bearing is there. That's what I want to repack while we're at it. Okay, so I packed that one with that grease packer. We'll film how to use that. But I packed the bearing full of grease, and I usually just wipe some on the outside, and the race still has plenty. You know, there's a what they call a race, what that bearing rides on right there, and that's all still got plenty of grease inside that hub. And so what you want to do is just set the bearing down in there, and then we're going to take our new grease seal right here, and it's real obvious the way it goes in, I think. you see it's got a lip there that's different than that. The outside of it is the smooth part of it, and the inside of it has a lip on it. And we want to just put it in there, and then what we do is we just get a hammer and tap it in there. Let me go back into the shop and get my hammer. Usually what I do is just get a little block of wood so I don't hurt that seal, at least to get it started. It mounts flush. Okay, so now we've got the inside bearing. Of course, that's the most difficult one. The outside bearing, as you recall, it's secured down with a nut, so it doesn't have any kind of a seal. So what we're ready to do now, and I need to clean my hands up so I don't get grease all over that new rotor, is to put that rotor on there. But first, let's show how to pack that bearing with this old bearing packer. Let me go get that other smaller bearing. So to pack the bearing, all we really do, it's very simple. We just put the bearing in there like that. And this is kind of a messy job, but it's just two concentric cones. They screw together. You got to get the bearing kind of straight in there. And then just attach a regular grease gun with that special wheel bearing grease, and then you'll be able to see the grease come out of the bearing. I'm pumping the grease in there, and look on the edges, it comes right out. And that's what we want. We want grease all inside the bearing. It doesn't do any good on the outside of the bearing. Now I don't know if you can see that, Gordon, but
yes,
it's coming out.
Yes, I can.
Now, so as soon as we get it coming out on all sides, we've got our bearing packed, and then we can just take it out of there. Now that bearing is full of grease, and that's what's important. Then of course we just rub a little on the outside too, but what's critical is we get inside the bearing. So now we got that one packed, and we'll put it back. Now I need to clean my hands up before I put that new rotor on. I want to get as little grease on that new rotor as possible. And if I get any on there, I really need to take some brake cleaner and get it off, because that's if we have grease all over that thing, the pad won't get a good bite and it'll really slip. While we're at it, we thought we would just show you how to measure these rotors. As it turns out, this one has been turned, and that's a real no-no. But we could put the old one up against the new one, and we could see how much thinner it was, and we both got alarmed, Gordon and I. We just bought this car, and it's standard procedure when we buy a car to go through it and make sure things are right. Someone has turned this rotor. The bottom spec on a rotor is on a front rotor is 10.6 millimeters, and my little caliper only measures, and I don't have a micrometer handy. This is just a cheap caliper. I thought I'd show you how to do it with a cheap caliper that you can buy for $5 or $6 from Ace Hardware. It's just a plastic caliper, but it's good enough for this. But all you have to do is just measure the width, and if you convert the bottom spec, which is 10.6 millimeters, to inches, as it turns out, that's 0.418 inches. Well, you can see that I'm reading 0.36 inches. So, and these are real smooth on the edges. They don't have a groove, which means that I know they've been on a lathe and someone has turned them down. So it's 0.36 inches is well below the minimum tolerance for that disc. Now, the only saving grace here is the pads weren't in real bad shape, so the pads weren't worn down very much. But as soon as the combination of this disc and those pads ever got too low, those pistons could pop out of those rotors. And that's the point at which you die. So it was fortunate that we did this job. On your car, if you want to, you don't have to take the the hub off and all this. You can measure this with a standard caliper right around the place where the caliper mounts, the caliper on the car, the brake caliper. You can get in there and measure the width of these discs. And the spec is 10.6 is the bottom wear limit, 10.6 millimeters. That's 0.418 inches if that's the kind of caliper you have. And the top end is 12.6 millimeter, and that converts right to ½ an inch. So it's between 0.418 inches and 0.50 inches is the tolerance limit on the thickness of these rotors. Don't turn them on a lathe. Okay, now we're ready to put the hub back on the hub back on the new rotor, and we have to do this. It's real important that we do this with Loctite. So I use the medium strength Loctite and put a few drops on there, and these nuts go in the smaller holes. There are the big holes in this hub. That's where the lug bolts come through. The smaller holes is what we need to use. What I'm going to do is get them started, and then I'm going to go out there and, using the reverse process, I'm going to mount them by securing this thing again to that tire so I can get the proper amount of torque. And these things need to be torqued down to 115 Newton meters, which is equivalent to right at 85 foot-pounds. That's the spec on the torque. So just make sure you put them in with Loctite and torque them down properly. We'll put all 5 of them on there, and then we'll take it out, mount it again on the tire, torque them down, put it back. Okay, I've got this torque wrench set to 115 Newton meters, equivalent to about 85 foot-pounds. And so I want to torque these down. There we go. Okay. Now we'll take it off the hub, or I mean the tire, take the entire assembly off of the tire, mount it back. Okay, so we always get a little bit of grease on this. We're going to have to clean it up, but we'll put it on there. So we want to put the bearing on the spindle, and then the nut on top of that. There's a flat side to it. And then it can't be too tight. Typically what you do is you tighten it up to make sure that it's tight, and then you back it off. And you back it off, they say, until the wrench, whatever you're using, breaks free. So what we want to do is get it tight to where the hub is a little tight, but you see, that's too tight. The bearing can't be that tight. That puts a load on that bearing, what they call a load. So what you have to do is back that nut off to where you feel the wrench break free. And you can feel the pressure release on the wrench. Just at that point, and then you need about 10 more degrees back to the right. So again, if you tighten it up tight, then you want to back it off until you feel the wrench break. And then maybe you need another 10 degrees. And if you recall, that nut was exactly on the bottom when I started, and that's where it is now. So it's in that position. Of course, that's free, but now it's got no load on those bearings. Those bearings don't have any, they're not preloaded with tension. So then we tighten the nut in that position. That takes care of the hub. Now we'll wipe that all down and get it clean. We'll mount that caliper back and put our new pads in there and be done. Just let me clean my hands up and we'll come back and do that. Okay, we need to clean this rotor up, get the grease off of it, because we can't have grease on there when you mount new pads. There's brake parts cleaner, several brands, it doesn't really make much difference. Just spray it on there. Shouldn't have gotten any on that hub. The critical part is that rotor, and we need the backside of it clean too. I should have put that dust cap on. Okay, now we'll mount the caliper back on there. So to mount the caliper, this kit we bought came with some new bolts, and actually it has some Loctite, but I always just put a little more on there. You may not necessarily have new bolts, so I just do this to make sure that you get the point. You got to put some Loctite on these bolts that mount this caliper. So put a few more drops of Loctite on each one. And then we'll unwire this thing. It'll only go one way. You need to put it there, and you can mostly do it by feel, because it'll only go in one position really. It's kind of hard to see back around on the back side of there. Now remember, it's a 19 millimeter. I'll start with a ratchet, and then we'll torque them down after I get them cinched with a ratchet. I got them run in with a standard ratchet. Now with a torque wrench, I'll torque them. Front for that one. There we go. Now we're ready to put the pads in. All four pads are the same. So, of course, we want the inside of the pad to touch the rotor. And as I can see, we're going to have to back that off some more with my big pair of pliers. One side tends to move as you mash on the other side, but you can see that they slip right in there. We might have to tap them a little bit. Whatever you got handy. Shouldn't have to force them very much. Now you want to line the holes up with those pins that are going to go through there. So, got that one lined up. Now I know that I'm going to have to back off this piston too. But the other piston is now being held in position by that pad. Now I want to mount the other pad in such a way that the little hole where that sensor goes, the little slot, is offset. So one is up and one is down, if you will, on either side. I don't want them both on the upside. Now, as you recall, we've got some springs that go on there. And watch, the springs just go in there just like that. They hold, well, they keep the pistons from coming out of there. So you have to secure at the top and the bottom. Again, there's a little notch right there that rests on. So they just slide in there like that. And then the pin needs to go, you see, on that side. Now I need to line that one up a little more. And I might have to get my little ball peen to tap those in from the back side. They're self-aligning actually through that. And now I just need my ball peen, so let me go get that. Need a little, of course, the hole to come through where the little cotter pin goes. I got the top one. Sometimes you have to turn them a little bit so that you can get the cotter pin in there. If I were more careful, I would have made sure that that hole was in the right spot. There's my little cotter pin. So I want to just put the cotter pins back in. If you recall, one of those had a wire on there. Okay, the last thing we want to do is put these little sensors in these pads. You see there's a hole in the pad, and so the sensor, a little stub that fits into the hole, and then it just pushes on there. Sometimes you have to persuade it a little bit. Don't want to hit it very hard, but it goes on there pretty easy. And then it just plugs in there. And sometimes you can use a pair of needle nose to get that in there properly. Okay, and then there's another sensor, likewise, goes in the bottom one. That's probably just a cut. Got the bottom one in. Okay. It's a little tight. Not very, but it will tighten up as soon as we apply the brakes a few times. So that's it. Now we just have to put the wheel back on. We're finished with that side. Now we won't film the other side, it's exactly the same way, but we will go look at the back ones just to make sure they're okay. Now, as we said, if you wanted to measure your calipers, what you could do, right up here at the top of the caliper on the rotor, we can get a measurement. Just right up there, there's a little bit of space, and we can slide a set of dial calipers in there and make a measurement. Now that's the new rotor, and it's right at 1/2 inch, and that's the spec on the new rotor. Okay, now we just need to put the wheel on. Okay, the back brake pads and rotor are they're simpler than the front. We've taken the wheel off this and we have it up on jack stands. These pads and rotors don't need to be replaced. The rotor spec on the back is 8.3 millimeters is the minimum, and 10 millimeters is typical. 10 millimeters is 0.40 inches, and that's exactly what this one is. If you convert 8.3 millimeters to inches, it turns out to be, see, I calculated it out to be 0.32 inches, so this one is almost new, so we don't need to change this rotor. And actually these pads look good too, but we're going to disassemble this just to show you how to do it. It's real simple. We just knock these pins out. There are no cotter pins on this one, so the pins are held in by a little keeper. You just take our punch, knock them out. So you got 2 pins, and there's just one spring. Sometimes with the accumulation of a lot of brake dust, these things can get wedged in there pretty tight. But Just have to be a little patient with them, get them out sometimes. They take the pads off. We'll put those back. Those are real good. And then you take the caliper off, and after you take the caliper off, the rotor will come right off. Again, they're 19 millimeter nuts. And the same as the front. We want to hang it up there, a piece of wire, so we don't put a strain on that brake hose. Once we do that, the rotor, the back comes right off. Now you notice the emergency brake system is here. So they have a little brake pad, if you will, like the old drum system. And what it does is it catches the inside drum of the rotor. But anyway, these rotors are fine. If you wanted to replace them, that's what you do. And then all you do to put them back is just line them up with the axle holes and put the caliper back. Now again, we've got to put it back with Loctite, just like we did the front. We're going to torque these down, same as front. Take that wire off of there, put the pads back. Since we didn't put new pads on this one, I don't think we'll have to squeeze this much because they're pretty much down. We'll see. Both sides are the same. And then put this little spring back. And then these will only go again one way. Pretty much self-centering. And voila, that's it on the back. And we just put our wheel back on.